Ever wonder why some teams constantly and consistently create breakthrough products while others are barely keeping up on their maintenance work? Today, we're tackling how to build environments where product innovation actually happens. Every product leader has watched those promising ideas die because of organizational roadblocks, excessive caution, or flawed decision processes. And firsthand that brilliant concepts mean nothing without the right conditions to develop them. From this episode, you'll walk away with methods to immediately transform how your team innovates. Our guest is Catherine Connelly. She's a 20-year female tech entrepreneur, and she co-founded My Yearbook at the ripe age of 15 years and grew it into the Meet Group, which is a large social dating company, later achieving exits totaling around $600 million. Her recent book, Designing Success, Lessons from 20 Years as a Female Tech Entrepreneur, captures 2 decades of creating environments where breakthrough innovators and breakthrough innovations thrive despite constant market shifts. I'm really eager to hear more about some of her insights. If you are listening to us and you want to watch the video version of our discussion instead, simply go to YouTube and search for Product Mastery Now. Let's jump in right after this.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Catherine, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to learn from your experience. When we first got connected, I was excited about your emphasis on creating the right environments for innovation, and you have had different experiences doing this. Let's focus on the Meet Group, this dating social network, and feel free to give any details of the experience there. But I'm really interested to start with, what did you do, like purposely think about, how do we cultivate innovation in this environment?
So I think a lot of the culture that supports innovation is coming from the founders, is coming from the founding team, how things worked from the very beginning. And so that was just always how we built things. So as we were building the company, as we got the initial ideas, we were always very aware of just the iterations that it took. And so when we started My Yearbook, so My Yearbook eventually became the Meet Group, but it launched as just My Yearbook, which was a very basically scrappy idea from 2 high school kids. And we would get ideas.
It was like Facebook, right? Only focused on a yearbook. We all remember being in high school and getting each year that printed yearbook thing that was static, and did it change or anything like that?
Right. So yeah, and we actually got the idea from flipping through a normal high school yearbook, and we're like, why aren't these online? Our pictures are bad. We don't actually know anything about the people in it other than their name and photo. It's just not useful.
Right.
And so kind of coming from that pain point was why Dave and I decided to build it, my brother Dave. And our oldest brother joined us too, Jeff. And the 3 of us, I think part of it was because siblings, we're used to spitballing ideas. We're used to kind of just working together. And so what's wonderful about that, as we're starting this company, as we're building something, there's no fear about pitching an idea and having it not set. And so I think that's so important as you're building that culture, to find ways that you can have safeguards so that you can say that you can put out your dumb idea, and yeah, someone might laugh at me. My brothers might laugh at me, but they're not going to think less of you. You're going to say whatever. It makes it so that you can pitch whatever you need to pitch and not have some repercussions of like, well, that idea didn't work, so you must be a failure. It's like, no, your worth isn't tied to the success of your last idea. So the part of it is just the culture around the company that you're building, and the culture that you need to set has to have that assumption. So how you get there really comes around to how your team is treating kind of these shots on goal. So when I was at TMG, one of the things that we would do, we'd have our product results meeting, and everyone had to give results for their experiments. So there was this emphasis on not only reporting this product did well, this experiment did extremely well, but also what failed. So what's the learning point there? And frankly, in those meetings, those were the ones that got the most attention, got the most of the time, because when you learn so much more from products that aren't really doing well than really ones that are, because you might not always understand the exact reason something's working, but to see something fail and then you're like, okay, well, let's change this thing. What happens now? I think that's that kind of culture of experimentation and just wanting to try and having the initiative to try those things helps and makes it very clarifying. And in order to actually have people want to make those experiments and make those changes, you have to have safeguards in place so that if something, so that it actually is risk-free. So early on, well, actually not that early on, but like mid-history, about 2013, Facebook Connect was how a lot of people signed into different apps. And so when we
Right.
released a standalone app, we actually did it with the only way to sign up or sign into this app was via Facebook Connect. And over Thanksgiving weekend, someone on the team accidentally deleted the app from the developer account on Facebook. So now Facebook account login is broken. You can't get in at all. It's a holiday weekend, not the great timing. And so mistakes are always going to happen, but the key is to have the process be, don't ask who did this, but instead ask, how did this happen? How can we keep it from happening again? And create the process for figuring out, okay, well, maybe not everyone needs that level of admin access to the apps, and figuring out where you can actually have those safeguards so that you can be clicking around, you can be trying something without having to worry about there being some type of devastating consequence.
Right.
Yeah. And my day-to-day role at TMG was doing a lot with performance, but after we were acquired in the $500 million acquisition in 2020, we were having a process audit by our parent company. And one of the things that they asked was like, oh, well, what if one of the people on your team accidentally changes the daily spend cap from $1,000 a day to $10,000 a day for a specific campaign? And they were like, that would be absolutely awful. And I was like, well, because what I feel like what they were wanting me to say was I check every single thing that people on my team were doing. But obviously that doesn't scale. And that's just not how we worked as a company. We're not micromanaging. We're all doing our own work, and we trust the people that are on the team to do things well. But additionally, I also know that there's other safeguards in place. So for instance, having a decimal point be off isn't going to be a big deal if you're actually, because there's other things that control it. There's the spending cap, but there's also the actual amount we're paying. And if somehow we're able to spend $10,000 a day while on a specific campaign while keeping our customer acquisition costs stable, then that actually is a very good experiment. Now we just learned how to be insanely efficient. And so it's one of those, if there was a mistake like that could be made, is something that we could easily see and rectify. And so I think having basically the data that you're tracking be so that you can actually see when a mistake is made in basically real time and be able to say, oh, okay, well, let's just fix that and we're back on track is kind of one of the secrets. Because I think that why the Meet Group was able to continue making innovative products for so long, and they continue to do so, is because there is just this culture of respect and ability to an understanding within the team that, yeah, failures can happen, but you bounce back, you learn from it, and you keep moving on to the next product. And I think that really comes from having that kill fast mindset and having that mindset of just like everything is an experiment.
Yeah, okay, so lots of good things in there. One thing is you're talking as I teach executive MBA courses on innovation. Just yesterday during lecture, I was talking to students about challenges that they run into, and one of the women shared that, she's been in a previous class with me. She has a very innovative mindset, and she likes solving problems and doing things that really add value to the organization. And she's somewhat recently changed organizations, and she's in an environment where there's lots of micromanaging, which surprised her. She didn't detect this going into the organization. And as you're talking about, the environment makes a huge difference here. And you're talking about an environment that embraces failure as a learning tool and doesn't hide that, right? And so there's three things you said that I really want to follow up on. One, iterations. The other one is the shots on goal, that you're celebrating when it doesn't go in the goal, right? And how you do that. And then you just mentioned experiments too. Why don't we dive a little bit more into that shots on goal thing? How was that? Was that just natural because it was you and your brothers, and as you start building a team around you to do this work, was it just natural to talk about, oh, that didn't work, let's dig into what we learned from that? Or where do you think that came from that became part of the culture?
Yeah. So honestly, as soon as we had a team, so we opened our first office in New Hope, Pennsylvania. So not really a tech hub by any means, but in our first team meetings, we would have our 10 a.m. operations meeting, and most of the focus was just on what's not going well. And I think that just became part of the culture. And so it's early on in those initial habits where that culture forms. And so much later when we're having those product results meetings, that's much more specific to the product teams. You start to just it just becomes normalized to talk about these things. And just communications in general, there was always an all hands, bi-weekly all hands along with a company lunch, that it's just so important that everyone in the company knows, no matter if they're on QA, if they're trust and safety, if they're product, if they're marketing, that everyone knows like what are the projects that we're working on. Because I think that another point, innovation can come from like anyone on the team. It's not just going to be siphoned off to your product team, but being able to just have an acknowledgement that like anyone can have an idea that's just like, oh, well, let's go for it. Now, when I say shots on goal, like sometimes those shots on goal we used to keep this updated slide of our app graveyard. Basically, all of these, like we did launch a few standalones. So the main apps in the Meet Group portfolio were Meet Me, Scout Tagged, and Growler. And Meet Me was the one we created, and that was originally my yearbook, and then the other ones we acquired. But at different times in the history, we had Charm, we had Unsaid, Advice Chat, Roar, Battles. Like there was like the graveyard was getting pretty full. And then there was also some of the other ones from some of the other brands we had acquired, like WeChill. And in addition to that, there were so many features over an 18-year history. We sunsetted so many features. And I think that at the time you're launching something, you're optimistic about its growth. You're like, oh, this is going to work. But we're so ready to say, oh, no, let's not put any resources here. Let's kill it. I think that just being able to make that decision to actually quit what isn't working was key to how we did those moonshots. Because we would recognize that something was a shot on goal, but it wasn't our only one. And so when something failed, we were say, okay, that's not working. Let's pay more attention to over here and see what could be working there. Or sometimes it was a feature that was working incredibly well for a long time. Like one of our features was called Match, and it was like the Tinder queue before there was a Tinder queue, and obviously it continued on for many years, still very popular UI. And eventually how Match was set up just wasn't really working anymore. And even though that this feature drove a lot of growth before, doesn't mean it's going to continue to do so. And so I feel like highlighting all these features within the product results meetings, within just the normal day-to-day conversations at the company, really showed that what was working, what wasn't, what we should continue making shots on. Because at the end of the day, like you don't need one good product. Every good product is your shot on goal, but you need a number of them to go through. And so it's really just focusing on, well, how can we continue to make more?
Yeah, and not be afraid to kill the things that aren't going the right direction, put our resources on the things that look more valuable and that are working. But within that, celebrating the failures, right, in a sense, because we're learning from it, right? It's the Facebook fail fast sort of idea. As innovators, this is a little bit different from operations, right? From the MBA student that is trying to optimize operations in the organization, the traditional path. Innovators, we think differently because hopefully we're thinking of mistakes as learning, and iterations is part of this for sure. And you mentioned iterations, and I view iterations as learning cycles. I don't know if you have a follow-up on the iterations thing you mentioned, or maybe an example of where that really came into play in some work.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples was some of the iterative process of this. Actually, there's a few, but one is the feature Battles. So the feature Battles, which was a popular feature on our website actually at the time. The idea for it actually came from an initial feature that was called superlatives. Again, getting back to my yearbook thing, the yearbook aspect, we played with it on there. So there was a superlatives feature. And we started getting feedback from users. This feature sucks. Which, yeah, it did. It was kind of stale, kind of boring. The same people in each network were winning basically the same category. That's boring. But we took that feedback and we created Battles, which was a one-on-one image contest between two friends. And so that was kind of the iteration. We took something that was like, you're competing for like funniest, and now you're competing in a head-to-head competition. So, it was an iterative approach to that feature that made it significantly better. Obviously, there was user feedback that played into it.
Yeah.
Another piece of the iteration aspect is we released a feature called Live in about 2012, I want to say. It was one-on-one video. You could play games. We were really excited as we were building it. It took a lot of resources to build. I remember that. And it did nothing interesting at all. But we learned it from that. We learned when we built that one, a lot of people don't want to be on camera. So one-to-one, the numbers just aren't really working. But and maybe playing backgammon and checkers with your chat partner just isn't that interesting, which was some of the things that you could do. And then of course it was that at that time that was mostly a web-based feature. It was 2012. Fast forward when we started developing our live streaming process, our live streaming feature, which was also called Live, it was much different. We realized that needs to be one to many. You can't just have one-on-one video. There's just not enough people that want to be on camera at the same time.
Right.
And so we built it as a one-to-many feature. And we learned so much from that initial launch of Live that took when we had the actual major live streaming feature many years later, we were able to apply that learning to. And one of the other things that we learned from our initial experiences with Live was when we saw chat roulette at the time. If you're familiar with it, if anyone remembers it, it was like a random video chat, but it had a huge problem with male nudity. And so when we released our live feature, we didn't want to have the same problem with male nudity. And so there was a lot of things that we had to figure out on the trust and safety side of things.
Yeah.
And so one of those things, for instance, was if the screen grab we took had a face in it, if the video stream had a face in it, it was significantly less likely to have nudity. And so we took that learning and we were able to apply that to other things. So even though the feature Live itself didn't work, it led into all these other things that we learned from the trust and safety side. Where it's like, oh, okay, now that we've moderated for video at this scale, we can apply that learning to moderating everything else we're already doing anyway, but do it even better. And by the time that we were moderating the Meet Groups live streaming, which is a significantly bigger thing, at that point you're dealing with like just over like maybe 1 million video users, and you're seeing and you're finding a way to actually moderate that in real time, which is a very tough problem to solve. But all of that is from years and years of learning how to do it. And so get better at these things. The bad actors also get better at it. So then you have to figure out how to tackle that. But everything is learning.
Yeah, lots of iterations, which also kind of does suggest the experiments too. What I took away with, as you were talking about that, going from like those superlatives to the battles, is did it sound like you're trying to get this right the first time, right? It's like, let's put out a capability, get feedback from our customers, because customers often surprise us, right? That they like the things that we didn't think they would like, and they don't like the things that we thought for sure they were going to like. But put it out as quickly as you can, get feedback, make it better, and find something that actually delights customers.
Right. And that's, and that's exactly it. We would put it out there to see how can we learn from this. I think that's how we built the company. It's also, we would do a lot of surveys, a lot of just learning directly from users. No user survey is going to say the next thing you should build, but it can be very informative of what their actual pain points are. And so we did a ton of surveying just to see how our members could use our apps the best.
Yeah.
What's actually a pain point for them versus what we perceive as being a pain point for them. And that leads us in a better direction than just doing what the product team wants to build, because that's what the tech echo chamber is discussing right now.
Right. Understanding what customers actually, what their problem is, what the pain points are, what they want to gain, certainly important. I want to go back to my comment that was kind of on the side of, when we think of management, it is trying to make the organization better, to optimize what we do and make things more efficient and improve over time. And you grew the organization from a founder's perspective, and you brought in that innovation culture. But as organizations grow, that often gets pushed out, right? Often the founders at some point do leave, and so you literally lose that founding energy to start with. And even when they don't, we often will bring in quote unquote professional management that can take the organization to the next step, and that kind of innovative spirit gets pushed out, and we find ourselves in organizations that have a tension, or maybe it doesn't even exist because there's no innovation going on anymore. But operations, certainly important. We have to execute. If we're not executing, we're not developing revenue to keep everyone employed and take care of our customers and our communities. But there's also, we got to be preparing for the next thing, right? Talk a little, and I don't know how much you saw that as you grew this organization, but kind of that struggle or the tension between, we're going to excel operations, we're going to try to still pursue innovation.
Yeah, so I think what this question most reminds me of in my journey is kind of our transition from web to mobile. So we built a web property, we were monetizing a web property. And now all of a sudden we realized that we needed in 2010 to build mobile apps. And, that's very different from web. And what was especially challenging about that time is we had already, so we went public in a $100 million SPAC-like deal in 2011. And so now we're public and all our revenue is coming from web. We have public company investors that they like it when you continue to make money.
Sure.
So kind of coming from that private standpoint to now being a public company and realizing, okay, we have to be very serious about how we continue to show the revenue growth, the things that investors need to see, while still being true to like where this innovation is going to come from, because it wasn't going to come from web, and we knew that. And so that's where I think a lot of storytelling really enters. Is like just such a critical skill in being able to get people to be excited about the new vision. Because the vision was, we need to be on mobile. We need to be developing mobile. We release these mobile apps. We're putting all of our resources to mobile. And that was, of course, the right call. Of course, it's hindsight. But it was the right call at the time, too, because for an app that's about meeting new people near you, everyone having a GPS device in their pocket makes sense. The way that you chat with people, the way that text messaging worked, it made sense that an app for this, that you would do similar activity with, would do very well. And so, of course, that's where we wanted it to go. Now, communicating that to the public markets was different. So we had to be very transparent, very open, and very honest about, you're going to see some down quarters. You're going to continue to see a declining web property because our users are all leaving for our mobile apps where monetization hasn't really taken hold yet. And so it would be saying, okay, these are the things that we're launching on mobile to revamp monetization. But a lot of the focus has to be on, we know that there's going to be some quarters of pain, but for the long-term health of the company, this is where you need to go. Because just because something is working now doesn't mean it's going to be working 6 months from now. If we didn't transfer to mobile when we did, who's to say how our story would have played out? But we certainly wouldn't have been nearly as successful on mobile as we were. And then much later in our journey, when we decided to build live streaming video, that was a huge bet. There was no one doing live streaming video like that except in really Asia markets. And that's where we kind of got the concept, was looking at the app Momo and being like, oh, this could work in the US. Twitch was the only thing really doing one-to-many live streaming and that anyone really knew of. And of course, that was primarily desktop. That was primarily video games. And so when we were building it in 2016, we said, okay, this is another bet the company moment, because ad revenue, where we had made most of our money, wasn't doing particularly well. And so when we were going out to investors, going out to say, hey, this is what we're working on, we were focused on like, this is where the promise is. This is the story behind it. This is the thesis. This is why you should believe that this is where the whole market is going to go. And having that skill to actually communicate that, I think, is important, because whether it's your internal team has turnover and they're just going to be maybe less innovative than the founders that were there, or whether it's outside stakeholders, the most important aspect that I think any product owner can have and any CEO can have is how to get people sold on the idea, on the actual story of like where it's going, why you're doing it. And sometimes that takes, you got to back it up and you got to explain it, because otherwise it's going to be so hard to convince people to give you resources, convince people to be investing their time and energy. Speaking of engineers, like if we just went to engineers and like in our state of the company reports, we're like, okay, everyone, just move, add ARPDAO another penny and things will be great. That's not that exciting. That's not something that people are motivated to go into work every day to work on. And so as an organization, it's so important to find out what is motivating your team. How can you keep them motivated? And part of that is bringing them into the whole story, not just this is the feature we're building, but this is why we're building it. This is what we expect to see. This is the transformation that what you're working on is going to give everyone. And I think that a lot of times I see that missing in organizations. They will say, this is what we're working on because this is what I said we're working on. And that doesn't win the hearts and minds. You need to win people over. And the other aspect of that, of winning the hearts and minds, is also remembering who the users are that you're building for. And I think that also just helps refocus the energy onto, yes, companies need revenue. Yes, they need profit, but they're not going to use you if you're not meeting their need. And so bringing in customer stories, I think, is an important tool for just, again, reconnecting your work to the tangible effects it has on someone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those customer stories are valuable. It sounds like you built the foundation to be embracing innovation. And in the examples you just shared, recognizing where the market was going, what trends were taking place, how technology was evolving this area, and that customers eventually were going to choose something else because someone else had embraced a better solution. And if it wasn't going to be you leading, you're going to be left behind. And you, based on those trends, made some reasonable bets and told shareholders that we're going to see a little slowing here because if we stay where we are now, like if we stay just on web and we don't move to these mobile apps, we're not going to be competitive in 2 years, right? And it sounds like you navigated those trends really well to take action. And I'm sure if we dove in more, there's examples that are like, yep, we learned something that didn't work and we kept going, right? Because that's what happens in innovation too. So many other things we could talk about. I really have enjoyed this. I want to focus on the people who have influence in their organization. I think anyone can do this, but maybe particularly like product leaders in the organization. What you might leave us with in terms of, we've heard a lot of good tips about the building the right culture and the value of how we embrace failure and doing the iterations and learn and pay attention to the trends. What else do you want to leave us with about building that environment that is going to be successful with innovation?
So I think some strategies that product leader can take to get change happening right away is just creating a structure to report experiments that didn't go well themselves. So start celebrating your own failures. Be the example of learning from failure, and then create a structure so that everyone else on the team can do that too. Because I think people are going to do whatever they see the leaders doing. And so if you're a product leader, you need to be the example and say, oh, this is what I'm working on. It didn't go well, rather than just trying to celebrate your wins. Another piece is, again, is just going back to focusing on who the members are, on who your clients are, and bringing their stories in, because I think that's just always going to be valuable in how you're just framing discussions within a team, is to bring those in. And so I think creating those structures to talk about failures, and also just making sure that the member, that your user, is always at the core of it.
Yeah, and to double down on that, it's easy for organizations to talk about the features, what we're building. Leading with the customer gives it meaning and emotion and why this is important. And I love that you shared that, focusing on those customer stories. Good tips and insights, Catherine. Thank you very much. We do like innovation quotes, and I'm going to ask you for one in just a moment. First, I want to tell everyone about, if you are on your path to professional product management, that this is something you're committed to, we have training for you to help with that. And just to pick up on what we just talked about, that customer story thing, when I was doing this training for Motorola, and it ended up training all their product managers through the system, that was the big thing that they told me that changed, because I'm an engineer. They're an engineering company. They said, we used to speak in engineering specifications in our meetings. Now our meetings incorporate, what is the customer thinking about? What does the customer need, right? And such a big change. I'm so glad to see that. The system focuses on customer research and 6 other areas. There's these 7 knowledge areas all together that you really need to know to be a professional product manager. It's called the Rapid Product Mastery Experience, RPM. You can do it individually, self-paced, or if you are a product VP and you really want to show some care and love and feeding, so to speak, of your product people, it will really improve their performance, and they're going to feel better working together too. So it's a great experience. You can learn more about it at productmasterynow.com and just look for the RPM experience. Okay, Catherine, what do you have for us for an innovation quote, and what does it mean to you?
I have a Pablo Picasso quote: action is the foundational key to all success. And I think that's just so important, because I think inaction is the default. And so a lot of times that you think about, actually you see, then research supports this. The person that kind of knocks down ideas, they're generally perceived as smarter than the person that's like, oh yes, let's try that, which is not great for innovation. That's the person that is seen as a smarter play. But that's just being inactive, and you really need action. You need to be taking the next step on whatever you're building to see where it goes. You need to be making that iteration. And I think that's just so important to kind of my journey. At any point, the company, over the 18 years, the company shifted dramatically, at least every 3 years, maybe every 18 months, just huge changes. And the reason it did was, the reason that we were able to compete in that market against gorillas like Match or gorillas like Facebook, was because we kept taking actions. We kept taking shots on goal. And so whatever you're doing, Think about how you can be doing the next product. Like, what is your next shot on goal? And if you don't know that answer, then that's what you should be thinking about right now.
Excellent. Appreciate the quote, and it ties in well with what we were talking about, doing those iterations, taking the next step. Be aware of where you're headed to and what's going on in the marketplace too. How can listeners find out about the work you're doing if they would like to look into your book? Where is that available? Any other resources you want to share?
Yeah, so Designing Success is available on all places books are sold online. Additionally, I hope you'll include in the show notes, I'd love to give all Product Mastery Now listeners a free virtual copy of the book. So you can get that in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Thank you. And of course, I also write on Substack, the newsletter Growing Up Startup, and I have monthly office hours to answer any questions. Kind of love giving back to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So definitely find me on Substack or go to my website, cconnelly.me. And I'd love it if you grab my book, love it if you review my book, but would especially love to see you in office hours and find out what you're building and any way I can help you.
Fantastic. Okay, so cconnelly.me is website. The free book, we're going to provide the link in the show notes for that, so everyone can get your book for free, the electronic version. So go check out the show notes for that. And if you get the book, please take the 2 minutes to leave an Amazon review for Catherine too. It's a very useful book, and I've enjoyed that we got to talk about some aspects that have come up through your experience about creating an innovation culture and learning to embrace failure and mistakes and just the iterations and experiments. So really delightful conversation. Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, again, the show notes, you will find those at productmasterynow.com/539. Go to the bottom of that article and you'll see the links, including the link to Catherine's book that you can get for free, digital download. Remember to leave the review. As always, everyone, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.